all these happy faces out here today. The Lunch and Learn series is sponsored by the City of Round Rock Planning and Development Department in conjunction with Round Rock Preservation. We are a non-profit that works on all things historic around the city. Our membership forms are up to the front if you're here to join us. Today, I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Mayfield. You have to be a member of our organization. I say that. The seventh generation Texan with family roots in Round Rock will go back to the 1870s. Mark is retired from the U.S. Department of State and spent much of his career overseas in Washington, D.C. He currently lives in Temple, Texas, but we're going to forget.
Thank you.
Take it away, Mark.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to Frank for that introduction and to the Round Rock Preservation Group for inviting me. Let me tell you a little bit about how this all started. We can turn off some of the lights. There we go. My grandfather ran the service station where the domino players held court, right there at the intersection of Mays and Main. He ran the station from the 1930s until the early 1960s. As my dad grew up, and my dad's here with us today, he spent about half his childhood at that station. Well, first as a little kid, watching the men work, and later on helping out, working around the station. From the late 30s through the early 50s, he pretty much had a front row seat to everything that happened in downtown Round Rock, and he collected some great stories. And I figured, well, somebody ought to tell them. But before I go any further, I need to give a little disclaimer. Some of what I'm going to tell you comes from research. It's things I know are true and I can back them up. Other parts come from family memories, from stories, things passed down by my relatives who heard things when they were kids and were telling things they heard years and years later. Some parts of it, it's me just trying to fill in with logic what I think happened based on sort of common sense. So if you hear something that doesn't match what you know, please raise your hand. I don't mind if you interrupt me or come talk to me afterwards. I would love to compare notes, and if your version of the story is better, maybe that's the one we ought to start telling. Part of what I'm going to show you and talk about are some short clips from home movies that my uncle Moody Mayfield shot in the early 1940s. Moody was my grandfather's youngest sibling. He lived in Round Rock his whole life, except for World War II, running a garage on the corner of Main Street and Mays that I'll talk about in a minute, and then working for years as a master electrician. Moody appears to have bought a home movie camera in the early 1940s, and he began documenting things around Round Rock at about that time. The things I'm going to show you appear to have been shot in the year or so before he left for the Army, late 1943 into maybe late 1942 into maybe early 1943. He also took his movie camera with him to the Army, and he shot images of his unit as his engineer unit moved across the Pacific. But that's another story, and that's another. Well, anyway, kind of like the Lord of the Rings, the tale grew in the telling. I realized that to explain some of my dad's stories, I had needed to back up and talk about my great-grandmother, Mary Matilda Swenson Mayfield. Now, Matilda, or Tildy, was born in Sweden in 1863. This picture is her mother, Christina, and her father, Bengt. This was in Sweden. I think it's possible it was their wedding picture. Her father came to Texas first, sometime in the 1860s, but after the Civil War. And then Christina followed in 1869 with Matilda and Matilda's younger sister, Justina. We know it was 1869 because Matilda remembered celebrating her 6th birthday on the ship coming across the Atlantic. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't imagine celebrating a birthday on a transatlantic voyage in 1869. You know, probably no cake, probably no candles, probably even no Dramamine. Now, according to the sisters, they arrived in New York and somehow or other traveled to Hempstead. Hempstead at that point was the end of the Houston and Texas Central Railway line. The family story is that Bengt met them with a wagon there in Hempstead, and he looked around, saw them get off the train, came running over, so excited, he came up behind Christina, wrapped his arms around her. She didn't know who it was. She jumped back with her fist cocked, ready to punch him in the nose. Anyway, that's one way to reunite. Over the next few years, the Swinsons lived in various places around Travis and Williamson County. But in 1876, Bengt bought one of the first lots in Newtown, Round Rock, at the corner of Liberty and Mays, about here. I believe that's what is now 100 East Liberty Avenue, and it's the parking lot of the sports bar, but anyway. Back then, Matilda said that Newtown was basically a city of tents. She was always very proud to say that her father built the first frame house in Newtown and the first house that had a shingle roof. And the story in the family is that Bengt also insisted that the house have double insulated walls, like he was getting ready for Swedish winters, not Texas summers. Because some habits die hard. But unlike a lot of the Swedish immigrants, Bengt was not a farmer. He was a blacksmith. He was the first one in Newtown, according to the sisters. Most of his business was repairing wagons and farm equipment, but his real passion was inventing. For example, he designed a new latch for wagon tailgates and a device for tightening straps around heavy loads like lumber or sugarcane. If Bengt were alive today, he'd probably have a YouTube channel and a garage full of prototypes. This is his advertisement for the tightening device, this locking buckle. In the late 1880s, he moved his business to Sugar Land. The family stayed behind in Round Rock. The Cunningham here, who's endorsing his invention, is apparently the E.H. Cunningham who founded the company in Sugar Land that became Imperial Sugar. So I just think that's a really cool connection. After they settled in Texas, Bengt and Christina had 2 more children. That is, if I've got the sisters right, that's Matilda on the left, Justina on the right, and then the Bengt and Christina, of course. The boys, William or H.W., and John, Uncle John. Based on boys' ages, this must have been like early 1880s. Now, there was one event from their childhood that really stuck with Matilda and Justina, and that was the Sam Bass gunfight, July 19th, 1878. Now, I grew up hearing different versions of the story. But we also have written accounts from interviews Matilda and Justina did, one in the 1930s for a Houston newspaper, and one in the early 1950s for the Austin American-Statesman. These are clippings from the two. The stories are great. They're written like in this old newspaper kind of language, kind of like the kind of thing that Spencer Tracy and would write in movies like Front Page. But the Houston story came about because of the 1939 South Texas Exposition. One of the exhibits at the exposition was a wax museum with an exhibit that included a wax image of Sam Bass. The two elderly sisters were invited to come see the exhibit, and a local reporter interviewed them, describing them as matrons with grown children of their own. Then in 1953, the Austin paper did a story about Sam Bass and interviewed him again. Now, according to the sisters, on the day of the gunfight, Justina was sick in bed. Their mother had just given birth to their brother John, 8 days before. Matilda had been sent to town to pick up some medicine for her sister. She had just come home when the shooting started. Their house at Liberty and Mays would have given them a really clear view about what was happening. Matilda later said she heard a couple of shots, but she didn't think much about it. And then suddenly there was a lot more gunfire. In their interviews, they described seeing Seaborn Barnes shot down in the street. They remembered Sam Bass, badly wounded, being helped onto his horse, apparently by Frank Jackson, and riding out of town with his wounded arm dangling by his side. Matilda described people shouting, running into the downtown businesses to seek shelter, and the clerks in the stores diving under the counters to take cover. They really did have a ringside seat. Now, according to Matilda, Bass and Jackson crossed Russian Creek on where the old Highway 2 crossed the creek at the old highway bridge. The sisters then said there was a whole crowd of people that followed after the wounded outlaws, not just the Rangers, but men, women, and children headed out of town, some on horseback, some on foot, some on buggies. After the shooting stopped, they remembered Barnes's body being hauled away. They said, in a box in a two-wheeled cart. And according to one of my great uncles, he quoted Matilda, saying she later went downtown to look at the scene and said, there was blood running in the street. When I was a kid, I know that. But the part that always gets me is what happened after Bass was captured. The sisters said that Bank helped care for him because he was brought to a little house right across the street from where they lived. But Bank helped care for him as he lay dying and then helped lay him out after he passed away. Now, family tradition says that when Bank first came to Texas, he sometimes made coffins, and there's been speculation in the family that maybe he built Sam Bass's coffin. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the speculation. But Christina went and picked flowers from her garden for the funeral. The sister said she was thinking about him being somebody's boy. And that's kind of the emotional heart of that story for me. Here's Matilda, apparently a few years later. And if you take a look at that dress, I assume she made it herself, and the detail and the work that went into that is incredible. But in 1885, Matilda married James S. Mayfield, Jr. James's family had settled in Texas, apparently in the 1840s, coming from Tennessee. They farmed around Burton, Texas. They had become very prosperous, but the family's fortunes turned pretty significantly after the Civil War, and they relocated to Round Rock at some point in the post-war period. Now, the couple had 10 children. Lenora, who was born in 1886, Irene, who married Pat Walsh, part of the family that ran the lime plant, Ike, Tom, Ben, Marie, Dick, my grandfather, Harry, and Moody, the youngest child. And when the siblings were all in their 80s and 90s, they would still remind people, oh yeah, Moody, he's the baby. They had another child who died of childbirth. Unfortunately, this wasn't a happy marriage. James and Matilda separated in the early 1900s, and they never lived together again. And although Matilda struggled financially raising her children, by the 1920s she had managed to buy several lots around Fannin and Mays, on both sides of Fannin Avenue. The house she lived in at 109 Fannin Avenue from the 1920s through the 50s is still standing, although it's been changed quite a bit and is hidden behind a solid line of bamboo. At one point, at least 3 of her grown sons and their families lived on that property with her. And before we leave Matilda, this is the first among Moody's home movies. We have extensive cat movies from the 1940s if anyone's interested. And I always thought it was strange. You know, Matilda, she was born in another country. She crossed the ocean as a young girl. She lived, saw the herds going up the Chisholm Trail, raised these kids as a single mother. But all anybody ever wanted to talk with her about was a couple of minutes of very violent action when she was a teenager. And she passed away in 1964, just before her 101st birthday. When she died, she must have been one of the last, if not the last, eyewitness to the gunfight. And my grandfather, Dick Mayfield, on the far left, was born in 1902. He was the 8th of the 10 children. His childhood wasn't easy, with Matilda raising the younger kids on her own. They struggled to make ends meet. He graduated from Round Rock High School, and he had started working when he was very young. As a teenager, he helped his older brother Tom on a farm west of town. That's Tom, the second from the right. Tom was a World War I veteran, still recovering from being gassed and wounded in France. After he came back from France, the doctor told Tom he couldn't expect to live very long due to the damage to his lungs. Maybe you shouldn't always listen to doctors, because he actually passed away in 1990. He was 97 years old. And actually, my cousin John Mayfield, Tom's son, is with us today. In the 1920s, Dick went to work for Harry Stockbridge at 109 East Main. There's a photo of the inside of the Stockbridge grocery. This is on the historical placard there on the front of the building. We think the young man behind the counter there on the left may be my grandfather. It's not completely clear. I remember looking at this photograph with my grandfather years ago, and he thought it might be him, but he didn't remember posing for it. My grandfather was usually working. He wasn't worried about taking pictures or anything.
She's got a question.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
What's the address of the store today?
I think it is, I think it's 109 East. Yeah. Dick married Fern Denham, whose family farmed near Gerald. My dad, also named Dick, was born in 1933. My grandfather built a small house on Fannin Avenue across the street from Matilda. And my dad's two sisters, Margie and Kathy, were born over the next few years. After working for Mr. Stockbridge, Dick went into the service station business. Now, this was a time when automobile travel and gas stations were all brand new. People were just figuring out how the business worked and didn't really understand, how are we going to run gas stations? What do we do? What do we sell? Dick's younger brother Perry also ran a gas station in this period here in Round Rock. And Perry remembered once he bought a load of watermelons and put them out in front of his gas station to sell. He said people teased him about it. They said no one's going to buy anything to eat at a gas station. They just come in for gas and oil and tire. And he was real proud of himself because the watermelon sold out really fast, and he kind of got the last laugh. But I like to think he anticipated Bucky by almost coming. Now, back then, the main highway came up from the south, crossed over the railroad tracks, and then turned east on Main, and then left, turned north, headed toward Georgetown. Dick ran a station there on Georgetown Street on the east side for a few years. But then in the 1930s, when the new bridge was built across Brushy Creek, what became Highway 81, he leased what we now call the Johnson Building, the building that's being redone, and he opened a Gulf station there. With the new highway, there was more traffic and better business came. This picture was apparently made in the late 1930s. This is when the station was still fairly new. That is my grandfather leaning over a pickup. That's Uncle Perry's pickup, apparently, and Uncle Perry is one of the gentlemen standing there in front of the station. Now that intersection, Main and Mays, that became a hub for the growing automobile traffic in the 1930s. Besides my grandfather's Gulf station, there was another station across Main Street, what's now a bar and restaurant. Across Highway 81 was the old broom factory building. That's where Dick's brother Moody and Marion Womble opened a garage on the ground floor. I think this is one of the first home movies that Moody shot. And I think what he did was, and sorry, the video controls on PowerPoint are terrible. At least that's my excuse, so bear with me. I think he stepped out onto Main Street in front of the broom factory, shot across Main Street, and tracked around to his right, to the east. And those two buildings are still there. That's the bar and restaurant right there. But after trying it out and seeing how the camera worked, Moody went inside the garage. This is inside the broom factory. What's now, I don't know, it's like a yoga studio and stuff. I don't know who any of these gentlemen are. If anybody can identify them, that would be fantastic. But I just love this because this is how people worked on cars 80 years ago. You know, the place I get my car fixed looks kind of sanitary. You know, it's all plastic and computers and things like that. That was not what was going on here. And there's always somebody who doesn't want the picture. And I love this pop-up advertisement of the Hula Girl. And bear in mind that a year or so after this, Moody was in the Pacific, and I wonder what he thought about what the reality was like compared to this fantasy image that he had him shot. This is 1940s automobile culture. And I love these cars.
So how much was gas back then?
I don't know, Dad, what was gas going for when you were a kid?
10 something, I think.
Yeah. 10, 15 cents a gallon.
And part of that was taxes, I think.
Oops. Okay.
Mark, was Moody also an electrician or later an electrician?
He was later an electrician. I never quite figured out how Moody acquired all of his skills. He had a lot of skills. He could fix all kinds of things. But as far as I know, he never went to school for it, but he did. My grandfather ran the station from the 30s until the early 1960s. Shortly after the end of World War II, he took on a partner, Eddie Burke, who was an Army veteran who had just returned from duty in the Pacific. Mr. Burke ran the station for several years after my grandfather retired, eventually switching to mobile after years being affiliated with Gulf. Now that station is, I think, where my dad's memories of Round Rock really began. As a little boy, he had walked from their house on Fannin to spend time at the station with his father. And then during the war years, when the family lived on a ranch west of town, part of which is now the Vista Oaks subdivision, he'd ride into town early with his father until it was time to walk to school. Then he'd go back to the station and he'd stay there until it was time to go back home outside of town at the end of the day. A curious kid sitting around in the middle of Round Rock all day sees a lot. And I've often wondered how much of his education came from the Round Rock Independent School District and how much of it came just from sitting around the service station and seeing what was going on downtown. This is one of Moody's other films. This is at the intersection of Main Street and Lampasas, looking west. The red brick is what I think then was the bank building. That's the TP&L office with the green sign. That was where Uncle Moody's wife, Leslie, worked for many years managing the office. And then we turn and we look up Lampasas Street, which has changed quite a bit in the last 82 or 83 years. And then here's the Stockbridge grocery store as it appeared in the mid-40s. The vehicle there is the delivery van because they did a lot of grocery deliveries. My dad actually worked for Mr. Stockbridge himself for a while when he was in high school delivering groceries. And then we pan along the south side of Main Street, look west, there's the intersection. And then this little Huck Finn looking guy in the overalls with the big straw hat, that's my dad. So, and I'm actually sure that's him because we have other pictures of that hat. Now, the 1930s and 40s were decades of rapid change. Radios became common, cars were changing every year except during the war, and there were airplanes overhead. One change that affected the service station business was the shift from the old visible glass pumps where you could actually see the gasoline in the glass tank before it got pumped into your car. When they got the new pumps, the ones that are more or less like the ones we have now, that was a big change for a lot of the customers. They didn't like those new pumps where you couldn't see the gasoline. And Dad says there were some customers from out in the country who would come in and they'd bring their own bucket. And they would insist that the gas be pumped into that bucket before it went into their car because they wanted to see what they were getting before. This is a little bit more downtown Round Rock. And this and the next one are shot in about the same place. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what we're looking at. So if anybody can figure out the location, I'd be really happy. This is some street work being done downtown. This is this really interesting shaped old building. It was a garage, but I don't know. I don't know what happened to it. It's no longer there. But then they pull over, and we hit the intersection, and you've got the street sign pointing Georgetown that way, Austin that way, and the signs for 79 and 81. I think this might be at the Highway 81 Main Street intersection, but I'm not sure. And sorry, I have a couple of problems where I wasn't able to clip really perfectly. But I think this is the very end of a row. I think he just took a picture of this gentleman because he wanted to finish out his row before he went to the development. But my dad thinks this may have been one of the guys who worked in the service station. He certainly dressed for it. And he's standing there in front of those same street signs. I love his attitude. I love his facial expressions. You got these great cars passing behind him. But I bet he was up to something. And airplanes were still really exciting. One of my dad's most vivid memories happened right around the time the United States entered the war. There was a high-spirited Air Corps cadet who was from Round Rock, and he decided he would buzz the town. He was on a training flight by himself. Dad was downtown, and he remembers it vividly. He says the plane came roaring in from the north at more or less rooftop level. I've asked Dad how low was he really. He said he had to pull up to clear the viaduct. Now some folks were not abused. He ended up getting reported, and the story goes he didn't get to graduate with his flight school class. But as I understand it, he did eventually become a full-fledged pilot and went on to have a long Air Force career. And I was unable to trim out this little kid, but this is downtown Round Rock again, down on Main Street. This is standing on the south side of Main Street, I believe in the 100 block. And we're going to cross the street here. There's the bus station. And Crim's Grocery, which was on the north side of Main Street, as I understand it, in the 30s and 40s. And most important thing on here, you get just a second of Round Rock Donuts. Old location down on Main Street. One of Dad's jobs as a young boy when he was around the station was to make an occasional run for donuts. The men working at the station would all, throw in their dime or whatever it took to buy the donuts and send him to get donuts for everybody plus one for himself. Now the ingredients were a little bit different then. And whenever Dad eats a Round Rock donut today, he talks about how carrying that bag of donuts back to the service station from the bakery, he had to keep his hand underneath the paper bag, otherwise the grease would just tear right through the paper. They're still good. I don't want to get big donut mad. Now, one thing that interested a boy growing up in Round Rock in those days was the volunteer fire department. My grandfather was a volunteer fireman for many years. One of his favorite stories about fighting fires was the time the department was called out to a grass fire somewhere in the county. The Georgetown Fire Department responded to the same fire. The Georgetown Fire Department had just bought a brand new, big, for that time, modern fire truck, which they were very proud of. And they started making fun of the Round Rock Fire Department and said, well, you're not going to be able to do much good out here with that little doodle bug. And my grandfather then explained how the terrain the fire was on was so bad that the Round Rock big truck couldn't get close to it. But the Round Rock team, with my grandfather on the fender, spraying water on the hose, was able to maneuver around, knock the fire down, and actually take care of the problem that Georgetown couldn't solve.
It's Round Rock.
Yeah. And within the fire department, there was some competition to be the first one when the alarm went off. Now, I mean, obviously, you had to get there fast because you were responding to an emergency, but also whoever got there first got to drive the truck. And if you got there second, you at least got to ride the front seat and didn't have to get in the back. My dad remembers one fireman who was always Johnny on the spot. He had a shoemaking shop downtown, and he worked in a big long apron. And Dad remembers him running down the street with that apron on, tucking the apron down the front of his pants, trying to get there in time. That is one of my favorite images when I think, anytime I think about a fireman. Now, my dad didn't witness anything like the Sandbass shootout, but Round Rock did have its longtime peace officer, Wayne Farrell. And this is not Wayne Farrell, but I've been told that this gentleman with the glasses is. People who knew him have identified him. Like I said, I don't know who this gentleman is, but I would love to talk to him because he looks like he needs some stories. Dad remembers one day when Mr. Farrell had a prisoner handcuffed in the back of his car. We don't know what for. When a line plant employee drove by in his line plant truck, and apparently this was a driver that Mr. Farrell had had problems with in the past, exceeding the speed limit. And when he went roaring past him, Mr. Farrell was not about to let that pass. But he didn't want to go chasing after him with the prisoner in the car. And he thought about it a minute, took the prisoner out of the car, popped his back seat out of the car, which was fairly easy to do in some of those old model cars, set it down next to a light pole right there by the service station, put the prisoner's hands around the light pole, handcuffed him, had him sit down on the seat, and said, "Stay here." Then he jumped in his car, chased after the line plant truck, wrote him a ticket or did whatever he was going to do, came back, got his prisoner, and went on his way. And I think we all know this picture. That's the station many years later when it had been hugely remodeled, even before the big office remodel that's now being done. But talking about Sam Bass, there's one more family connection that always caught my attention. Matilda always said that the little house where Sam Bass had been taken was more or less the same place where the service station stood, and the room where he died was basically where the grease trap was located. And that always sounded to me like a perfect setup for a ghost story. But unfortunately, I've never heard that the service station was haunted. That's a little bit of my family story woven into the story of Round Rock. They're not just dates and names, but they're people who lived and worked and struggled and laughed right here where we are now. Grateful to be able to share their memories with you. Thank you for listening. If you have your own Round Rock stories or questions or corrections, I'd love to hear them. Thank you very
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned a highway that Sam Bass, where you cross Russian Creek. I haven't been in Round Rock that long. Where is that highway?
much. What, from what she said, she was very specific. It's in, I think it's in the Houston paper, I'm not sure. She was very specific. She said that he and Jackson forded Russian Creek approximately where the Highway 2 bridge crossed it at that point, which would be like Georgetown Street.
Yeah.
So, yes, sir.
My dad told another story about Sam Bass that when his body he brought back to town, they couldn't find local doctors to treat him because folk didn't run out long. And then when he died, they couldn't find preachers to have a ceremony for his funeral, so the Masonic Masons gave him a funeral, and one of those Masonic Masons was my great-grandfather, which ended up being my grandmother's future father-in-law.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's a good story. And the Mayfields we're all Masons. Yes, ma'am.
Is Mayfield Ranch Development, was that ranch owned by the Mayfield family, I assume?
If you go out Sam Bass Road, when it makes a sharp turn to the north,
Yeah.
there's that soil conservation dam. That's the south end of my grandfather's ranch.
Okay.
1431 basically split his ranch in two,
Okay,
and then north of that was Uncle Perry's ranch.
okay.
So the Uncle Perry's ranch is now part of the Mayfield Ranch development, and then that Big City Park.
That Georgetown.
Yeah,
County,
and-
the Williamson County Park.
And you can drive through the park, and my dad can show you where the working pens were, and
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
where, you know, where we used to watch them shear sheep and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have a book?
I'm sorry?
You have a book?
No,
No, okay.
no. It's just all right here. Yes, sir.
Who shot A.W. Grimes? Was it Sam?
Maybe.
Nobody knows.
That, one thing that really strikes me, and I've been fascinated by Sam Bass since I was a little kid. Wrote a research paper on Sam Bass in college, but you compare it to big gunfights like the OK Corral, where people is very specific. It's been researched for years. Lots of people were interviewed who saw it. It's all kind of fuzzy. It's like things people heard, but it's a little hard to pin down some of the facts. But I tell you, in that store, there were a few seconds where I don't think anybody knew what was going on, really. That's my experience.
That was fascinating.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. I think we might invite you back again sometime. Haven't got enough of that.
Thank you.
My pleasure to present you with this certificate of appreciation. Support of Discovery Round Rock History Educational Program, which is co-sponsored by the City of Round Rock and Round Rock Preservation. Mark Mayfield's presentation serves to educate others with the rich history from the 40s and reflects great credit upon himself, his family, and the city of Round Rock and the Historic Preservation Program. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
How about some door prizes?
I would